Welcome to the IT Security ONE2ONE Summit podcast series. Listen to industry insiders discuss the most critical issues in IT security. Featured on this episode, Demetrios Lazarikos, better known as Laz, from VArmor.com, talks with Brian Bobo, VP of Enterprise Security, Schneider National IT Security and Disaster Relief. You are listening to the IT Security ONE2ONE Summit podcast series.
Hi, this is Laz. I'm at the ONE2ONE Security Conference, and this is day 2 in the conference. And today with me I have Brian Bobo, who is the CISO for Schneider Transportation. Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Good. Hey, I had the opportunity to attend your talk, and I was really impressed with the topic.
Thank you.
Before I drill down into that, I just wanted to see if you could share some of your background and experience for the listeners about where you've been and where you see things right now with cybersecurity.
Okay. Well, my background is I'm the CISO for Schneider, logistics and trucking company. Prior to that, I held a number of different roles with Target, including the Security Operations Center that we've talked about, as well as disaster recovery and some identity management types of activities. I also have led cyber teams in the National Guard and done different, computer IT roles within the Guard. So.
Nice, and that's with the United States Army National Guard, correct?
Correct.
And that's where's your unit?
My unit's in St. Paul, Minnesota.
All right, good. Yeah, I listened to your talk, and I think 3 themes came out. One is CISOs are evolving, and they have to think a little differently, as you pointed out, for a number of the attacks. The second thing I noticed was there's a lot of opportunity to weigh out what could or can't be done from an offensive or defensive strategy. And then I think the third thing I walked away from your talk was that it's changing, and with these changes, you have to educate your board, your leadership level, executive leadership teams, everybody at the senior level. You've got to get in front of and say, hey, these are things you need to consider. So, if you don't mind, I'd like to cover those 3 things as we walk through this discussion. So, first thing is how is the role of the CISO changing, especially with what you covered in the last talk?
Yeah, I think the role of the CISO is evolving, and when I think about it, it's evolving similar to the way the CIO role has evolved. So it used to be the CIO didn't necessarily have a equal seat at the table with the business leaders, and over time, CIOs have really understood that the way that they can have that seat is to understand the business, provide business value, educate the decision makers in the company and the leaders of the company how they provide value. And so when I think about the CISO role, it's very similar in terms of that role has evolved, and the people that are successful are the ones that can understand business risk, understand how what they do relates directly to the business, understand what risk is important and what risk isn't as important, and really communicate that in a way that the business gets it. And when
can you give us an example on what you think that risk would be that maybe is not as important as the higher risk items?
Well, when I think about it, the first thing I think about is how do you identify information that's important on your network, truly important. So there's information you think is important, and then there's information maybe because it's HIPAA related, so you have the regulatory piece that kind of helps you figure that out. Then there's other information that's probably very important to your business that you don't want competitors to perhaps get a hold of, but has no regulatory component to it perhaps. And then there's all the other stuff. And so a lot of times we treat it all the same, and we don't really focus on what's more important. So what I've done is I've evaluated and recommended, here's 4 key business processes to our business. And I did that in terms of disaster recovery and what do we recover first. But then when you look at information, the information that feeds those processes are the most important information we have as well. Communicated that with the business. They bought off on it, and that actually helped me refine it. I had too many processes on there, and they said, hey, you know what, cut a step off there. There's just 4 things we got to do.
So using that approach, you were able to demonstrate operational efficiencies, where the critical data elements were for your disaster recovery plan, right. And I'm sure that tied in somehow to your business impact analysis.
Right.
Perfect.
Right, and then also I think it helped build the credibility of the business because I'm talking to them about their business. I'm asking them what is the most important thing. I'm suggesting, hey, it should be this, and they're telling telling me, no, it's really not that. It's just these 4 things.
So you weren't going in there with your technical hat on. You were going in there asking more about the business requirements, how the company makes money, and what are the business drivers or growth potential for those units.
Right, and using it as a backdrop saying, hey, if we lose all of our systems, what are the things we absolutely have to do to stay viable as a company, and having those kind of discussions.
And how did those discussions turn out? I mean, what was the outcome? I mean, what was like the aha moment where they started to realize, hey, look, here's somebody who's technical and business savvy, but for you, what was the aha moment that they saw that?
Well, so I would say the aha moment for me, it was not for them, was when I first initially approached it with what I thought was the critical processes and the critical businesses. And the CEO said, why are you considering that? I don't even care about that. If that part of my business, if we go down, that part of my business is of so little importance, they go to the end of the line and they are not a priority. And it was not a part of the business that I would ever have thought that of. And so it made me take that step back and say, you know, I need to approach this differently. And so it was really having interactions with finance, for instance, and understanding, do we really need to accept cash? Do we need to accept payments? And they're saying, you know, we can defer that. We have lines of credit. We have these. And so you start to understand parts of the business that you don't really approach in that way a lot of times. And you don't think about, I don't really understand how finance people think. So I really learned a lot talking to them about what was important to them and what wasn't. And when I went back and shared that with the business leaders, and here's what I was thinking about, you could see it clicked for them. They were like, yeah, I get this. This makes a ton of sense. You have the right priorities. I'm 100% behind this. What do you need? And so it really changed the discussion. So that's when I really realized that we were on to the right things.
That's a great success story.
Yeah.
What would you, out of that piece, what would you coach up-and-coming CISOs or other CISOs that are out there that may have a hard time aligning to the business? What are some of the things that you would coach them on?
Well, see, I think I had an advantage in that I originally approached this from a disaster recovery standpoint. So a lot of CISOs don't necessarily have a direct responsibility or are not quite as involved in disaster recovery. Maybe some are and some aren't. And so I think it's really taking that mindset of, if our business went down, what's the most important thing that we'd have to do? And approaching that with the business, doing some research, talking probably to your disaster people who may or may not be thinking this way, because a lot of times they try to save everything too, and they don't focus on the most important things. It's just what we do, right? And as IT people...
Yeah, hold the data forever.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then really whittling it down. So what is the core steps in your business, the core processes that you have to do, and then you go back and you tie information to those processes. And then, of course, you have to think about it a little bit, too, in terms of, you know, HIPAA data has no direct link to those core business processes because we don't need health records to keep our business running. So you have to add kind of another component to it in terms of identifying the most important information. But then once you have your arms around that, then you can focus your efforts on that information and those systems and not your entire network.
Got it. Well, then that actually, talking about being proactive there, right? You're stepping up with DR and business impact analysis and interviewing the business and understanding a little bit about how that works. At what point did you start to realize that strategy played a big part in this information protection, information security, both from a offensive and defensive standpoint? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, kind of looking at the way we used to think was you just built a big fence, big wall, you put a moat in place, and I've used that analogy with the business. It works really well, by the way. So when I'm talking about what the most important information is, well, the most important information goes in the castle keep, and then you go out to the rest of the castle. So that's the next most important thing. Once you get outside the castle walls, you don't necessarily care as much about the invaders burn a cornfield off in the far reaches of the kingdom. You don't want that to happen, but that's not going to ruin the kingdom kind of thing. And so really trying to think about it that way, where before we tried to build the wall around the entire kingdom, and no matter what you would do, they would climb the wall somewhere because you couldn't watch everything. And so really thinking through that and looking at how we were approaching our firewalls, for instance, how we're approaching a lot of security where we just have a whole bunch of sensors out there and we're just hoping and waiting for the bad guys would cross the wrong thing, and we'd have the right signature on there, and then we would be able to identify that something was happening, and realizing that that wasn't going to work. And some of it came out of some of the training I did as a cyber person in the Guard, and some of the things we were doing around packet analysis and some really cool open source tools. And I said, you know what, this is not working anymore, and took a step back and repurposed my firewall manager. He quit. And so what I ended up doing was saying, okay, I'm going to outsource the firewalls because it's really commoditized type of work. And there's people better at firewalls than we are, right? There's people that are really, really good at firewalls, and I'll never be as good at firewalls as somebody is Dell, for instance, or RSA or some other folks that do this stuff and have people that are, see 1,000 different types of firewalls and are doing that and thinking about that. Then repurposed that position and created a cyber hunter position. And gave him some tools and some responsibility and said, one is you need to make your position. You tell me what you think you should be doing. So really hiring more of that red team kind of mindset, and then saying, you cruise my network, look for bad things. Hunt and look for bad things. Here's some tools that if we have like an MD5 hash or something, you can actually let the tool go out and scan and find it for us. But there's other things that you will never find it, so and what really opened my eyes was some of that training and seeing a packet, that was obviously encrypted, that was a really small size that made absolutely no sense going through the DNS.
But that was the outlier, right?
Right, and the system would never catch it because it was purposely designed to not be caught by your systems. And so they're exfiltrating the data just slowly through the DNS, and nobody's ever going to catch it unless you have somebody that's looking for that. And so really trying to make that shift from that the reactive phase where we're just going to try to save ourselves from everything and wait for something bad to happen, to being more proactive and just trying to get ahead of this and not wait for one of our sensors to tell us something's happening.
Wow, that's a very proactive approach. One last question, because I think you covered the three areas, getting the visibility, coaching the CISOs, and then talking about how to be offensive or defensive. One of the areas, though, that I found interesting is the way you approach this. You outsource some of the monitoring and alerting for your firewalls, and then you found this individual who happens to be an expert in looking at deep packet inspection, if you will. How did you find this person? How long did it take? Yeah. And what was the onboarding process for that role?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. So one of the things that HR didn't like was the Cyber Hunter title, but it's actually a really cool title. So, when you think about when you're trying to recruit people, it is a marketing effort. It is not an HR effort. It's not an IT effort. It's not a security effort. It's making this position sound super awesome, cool to whoever you're trying to target, because that's, you want to get them excited. And so we did that, but we also understood that there was no good job description for this. We were making this position up. There's not like you can go poach a cyber hunter from some other business, even though, you can really wrap your head around it when you start thinking about pen testers and red team, and those kind of folks are perfect to go after that. And we also understood that we may have to grow a person into this position. So we really looked at it in terms of, let's find somebody who's got the right foundational skills, who is excited about this, who we think we can train and mold into what we want, as opposed to trying to hope that we buy what we would want. And so we ended up hiring this gentleman that we are going to have to do some training with them. We're going to, but he's got a super awesome opportunity, because his whole job is to learn things like Kali and Security Onion and all these kind of things, and just make that role into what he wants. And so that was part of looking for that initiative of, you tell me what you think this should be. We're going to work together to grow this into a really great role. It's just a great. I
like the title. I like the title. I like the job description that you've explained, and I think there's a lot of growth potential for that individual. Yeah. And it sounds like you have leadership support, you have HR support, and the team support. Yeah. So that's a win-win, I think, all around.
Yeah, and I looked at it. I mean, can you imagine years ago somebody came to you and said, "Hey, do this. This is super cool.
Like you to be a cyber
you tell
hunter.
Me what you want, what you need to do, and tell me what tools you need and what training. We're just going to I think it's cool. I'm jealous of that guy, actually.
All right. So, Brian, if people wanted to reach out to you, and it sounds like you're ramping up your team, if you ever needed to fill those open spots, how would somebody find you?
I probably over email, I would say, right?
All right, good.
So it's bobob@schneider.com.
Great. Well, Brian, thanks for your time. This has been very educational. This is Laz, just winding up this discussion with Brian Bobo. If you need to reach me, you can always reach me at Laz, L-A-Z, at VARMOUR.com.
Thanks for listening to the IT Security One-to-One Summit podcast series. To listen to other podcasts or for more information on the IT Security One-to-One Summit, visit us at one2onessummits.com/ITSec. That's ONE2ONE summits.com/ITSEC.